Very good morning, everyone. My name is Jes Weigelt. I'm head of programs at TMG Research. I do have the pleasure of welcoming you all to this webinar entitled Innovative Digital Tools to Enhance Food Security in Africa. We have very exciting speakers with us, so I'm very grateful for you to attend, and very grateful to our panelists for making their precious time available to discuss with us today. This discussion takes place in the context of a project that is funded by the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development that focuses on the use of innovative digital tools for food security and SDG 2 more generally. To begin the discussions, I do have the honor and the pleasure to give the word to Alexander Müller, Managing Director of TMG Think Tank for Sustainability. Alexander, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Jes, and good morning to all of you. Thanks to the participants and the panelists for joining us here. What an ambitious title, Innovative Digital Tools to Enhance Food Security in Africa, bringing three really challenging topics together. The role of innovative digital tools as a mean to enhance food security, and then looking at Africa, a huge continent with a huge diversity. And therefore, I'm happy to welcome you here to this event, co-organized, as my friend and colleague Jes has already said, by IEEP and TMG. We are aiming today at triggering a discussion on the potentials and the challenges of digitalization as an accelerator for food security in the context of African-European cooperation. Potentials and challenges. I think we are all aware that we have to look at both sides. We are not raising, I repeat, we are not raising the question if we need digitalization. It is happening, it is already there, it will continue, but we are raising the question how to best do it. And let me put this together in maybe one sentence, a little bit focused and maybe not so much so very precise, but we are not looking towards digitizing the food systems, but looking at how to do development and how to ensure food security better with digitization. So digitalization is a tool, and we want to use it aiming at improving livelihoods, achieving food security, and staying within the planetary boundaries. Why is it so important to make the difference between digitalization of what is happening and looking at a higher aim? I would like to use the example of land rights and the role of digitalization, and I will only need 2 minutes for it. I have seen very often in the last months publications where people say, oh, with the help of blockchain, it will be easy to allocate land rights to people. As someone working for over 10 years in the area of land rights, I was a lot surprised, because the problem of land rights very often is that they are not formalized. We have informal land rights. We have a difficult and complex system of primary land rights and secondary land rights, use rights. So what are you going to digitize? And therefore, I think we have to look together in what are we digitizing. If you would digitize old cadastre maps from 50 years ago, you would have in a blockchain very precise the wrong information, which doesn't match reality. And therefore, land rights can be seen as a very good example that you have to first set a process in motion to identify land rights, to allocate land rights. Sometimes in a village, it has to, an agreement has to be achieved, who owns what, who can use what piece of land, and then you can digitize it. So digitalization might be an important tool, but based on the right perception of reality and based on the allocation of land rights to the right people. And therefore, I'm really looking forward to look at what could be the contribution of digitalization to tackle the multifaceted and structural challenges that continue to undermine sustainable economic development. And by the way, this is not only Africa. This is also in Europe. This is also in other parts of the world. digitalization will play an important role, but digitalization has to be understood as a tool, or let me say it again in a different way. Will the needs of the people and the necessity to support sustainable development be in the center? Or will the needs of the technology be in the center? And these are two different aspects. And I think within this debate, we will find out what are the needs of the people, how can we best use digital tools, and what kind of international governance debate do we need so that in the end, collaboration between Europe and Africa can make best use of digital tools and not allow digital tools to drive the political agenda. I'm seeing two of my colleagues and friends already on the screen, Leonard Mitzi and Sebastian Lesch, and I'm convinced that both of them are supporters of the approach. Let us do development digital, but have people and the planetary boundaries in mind. Welcome to all of you. I'm going to listen and happy that we can have this meeting. Thanks. Back to you, Yes.
Thank you, Alexander, for your kind introduction. And I think if I would start repeating what you've said, it would actually be that repetition. So I will refrain from doing so. To all our participants, if you have questions or comments, please use the chat box. You can also reach out to Bruno directly, who is in charge in case you encounter any technical issues. Now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Sebastian Lesch, who is the head of the division for innovation, agricultural value change, and agricultural policy at the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. Sebastian has agreed to join us, offering his perspective, what Germany's take on the link between digitalization and food security. Sebastian, thank you very much for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's indeed a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for the invitation on this quite special day in Germany. We have a new government coming in today that has not least digitalization on its agenda. So that's going to be quite interesting. I don't tell you any news if I'm saying that agriculture and rural development are key focal areas for German Development Cooperation. We have our special initiative, One World, No Hunger, going on since 2014. We are investing around 1.5 billion euros a year in strengthening the agricultural sector, rural development, and thereby, of course, global food security. Now, hunger and food insecurity are predominantly a result of lacking ability to access adequate food, right? It's not a lack of food, it's the lack of access to that food. As the FAO has concluded in its most recent State of Food Security report, inequalities are a root cause of hunger. And then there are, of course, poor post-harvest management, infrastructural problems, supply chain inefficiencies. All of that contributes to food loss, wastage, rising food costs. And then we have extreme weather events, we have a changing climate, unpredictable yields, and so on and so forth. So with our partners, we have developed and looked at innovative solutions to a number of these challenges. That's sort of at the core of our special initiative. And we've achieved quite a lot. We currently expect to reach a total of 9.5 million people over the next years with our initiative. But if we look at the global figures, obviously, hunger figures are still on the rise. The latest numbers show that around 800 million people in the world face hunger. And if you look at Africa, where most people are found, 280 million, that's about 21% of the African population. So if we take this leave no one behind seriously, then we need a new partnership here between Africa and Europe that must treat food security as a priority. And then, of course, I haven't mentioned the COVID pandemic. That is a serious backslide as well that will drive more people into hunger. So what could we do? Agriculture ranks high on the political agenda in many of our African partner countries because there is a huge potential. There's a huge potential to meet the challenge of food and nutrition insecurity, but also agriculture has big economic effects at the same time towards youth unemployment, towards general economic growth. But productivity in the agricultural sector remains low in Africa if we compare it to other parts of the world. So there is a need to transform the agricultural sector globally, but in a way that is productive economically, that provides living incomes and wages socially, and that is ecologically sustainable. That's climate smarter, more resilient against shocks of all kinds. And any innovation that we're looking at, because there's a lot of criticism towards the term of innovation, in particular in Germany, any innovation that we're looking at must fulfill these measures, these criteria. And if we're looking at digitalization, that goes for digitalization as well. Digitalization has a great potential to contribute to achieving zero hunger, to support an inclusive and sustainable transformation. There's a huge potential in ICT technology, especially in Asia and in sub-Saharan Africa. If we look at the growth rates in access to the internet in sub-Saharan Africa, currently 28% of people are using the internet, 24% of people still lack any access, but it is assumed that 70% of the world's population will have access to mobile data by 2025. So digitalization in the agricultural sector is already affecting the living and working conditions of the smallholder farming population, and they make up the majority of the nearly 1.3 billion people working in the agricultural sector. And those are the people whose needs should be addressed by digital development projects. Farmers are using digital tools already. They recognize that digitalization has the potential to give them access to market information, agricultural inputs, advisory services. And we've gained quite a lot of experience over the last years as German Development Corporation in developing inclusive digital solutions along agricultural value chains. Most of these solutions are obviously not developed by us at some desk in some ministry, but we're trying to leverage the enormous potential that is there worldwide and that is there particularly in Africa, in particular through competitive approaches, such as our SIZE program that targets startups in the digital area for agriculture. More than 300 solutions or digital-related solutions in the agricultural sector are currently being implemented or planned within our initiatives. There's lots of examples to show digital financial services, pest and disease tracking tools, increased traceability in value chains, improved recognition of land titles, as has been mentioned. So mobile phones, simple digital applications can already help to overcome infrastructure challenges in rural Africa. We start to know how to use this potential, but how to use it wisely. We're still learning, however. Digitalization, and that links into what Alexander Müller said in the beginning, it is a means to an end. It is not an end in itself. Digitalization happens fast, and often right now it serves the well-off and the well-educated first. Yes, digitalization will work without development cooperation, but it's then most likely to be very less development-oriented. If we want to make use of digitalization to achieve zero hunger, it is key that digital solutions are inclusive and that they be tailored to those who suffer from hunger and prevailing inequalities. So we have achieved a lot, but there's still a lot of work to do. We need to do a better job of bringing together stakeholders from different sectors of food systems, locally as well as globally. So if we're looking at a digital partnership between Africa and Europe, and I'm sure that Leonard is going to say quite a lot about this afterwards, then we should not only address food security, we should address food security more prominently than we currently do. And we must place this question of inclusivity, inclusive digital technologies at the center of the discussion. You know that today a new government is being sworn in Germany, actually at this very hour that's happening in our parliament. And later today, a new minister will come here to my department. But I can say already that Germany will be committed, together with all the EU member states and the Commission, to continue to do this progress of joint learning and support the EU-Africa relationships with support to innovative, development-oriented digital solutions in the future. And of course, Germany is in a special role there because we are taking over the German G7 presidency in just a couple of days, actually. With a new government coming in, you can imagine that that is quite a challenge. But still, we hope to make good use of the German G7 presidency for both our agricultural and our ag digital agenda. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. Thank you. Back to you. Yes.
Thank you, Sebastian, for sort of providing really this universe of an overview of this universe of challenges and opportunities that we face and how Germany is positioning itself towards those. So thank you very much, really, for this. And I really very much appreciate that you highlighted really who should be the target group of these digital solutions, which is those who are at the key of the agricultural value chain in many African countries, which is smallholder farmers. And I'm very grateful to you alluding to what the German government has been doing on this. Leonard, the Commission has proposed a very ambitious joint communication towards the Parliament and the Council towards a comprehensive strategy with Africa. I think this was very well received as it highlights the digital partnership. At the same time, I think if I read the Parliament's response correctly, some remarked or questioned the role of food security in the whole partnership. So therefore, I'm very grateful for you taking the time. For those of you who haven't met Leonard yet, Leonard is the head of unit of Sustainable Agri-Food System Fisheries at the European Commission's Director General for International Partnership. So he's best placed really to explain to us what are the plans or the thought considerations of the Commission in this comprehensive strategy with Africa. Leonard, thank you very much for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jens, and thanks to Alexander and Sebastian and to the organizers. This meeting, the seminar, comes at an important juncture. Sebastian mentioned the new administration, which is being sworn in. But the first country that your administration is going to is not Brussels, it's going to be Paris, which is good, because the Paris-Berlin-Bonn axis needs to be very strong. We know that there is a very traditional aspect of Paris and Berlin being strong, also on European unity. And European unity is critical at this juncture. Also, we know that COVID is again back. It's taking its toll. We normally should have an EU-Africa summit in February. We'll see whether this happens or not. This has to be physical mode. You know as well the geopolitics of COVID, because we speak now of geopolitics and what happened after flights were banned on the southern African parts because of Omicron in the last 2-3 weeks. So we will see what will happen. But clearly, and I can't speak about mantras here, the political environment is not focusing on food systems today. I said earlier on, we just came out from the Nutrition for Growth Summit, and yesterday the European Union, with the member states, we estimate we pledged around 4.4 billion euros. The Americans pledged 11 billion euros. This is for nutrition, for food, follow-up to the UN Food Systems Summit. So I'm not saying that the Americans are doing better than us, far from it, but if one looks at the historics, one sees that agriculture and food systems featured much higher in the agenda 10-15 years ago. I remember myself when we were at the L'Aquila summit. This was after the 2008-2009 crisis, where we mobilized millions, billions of euros to pump into agriculture. Why? Because we also knew that, and we know that agricultural commodity prices are going up. There is stockpiling. There is positioning also of Chinese stocks. We know that the numbers are not looking good in terms of hunger, of acute hunger. We know that conflict and climate change will trigger even more challenges. Afghanistan's, Yemen's, DRC's, Sahel of this world. And we know that from a migration point of view, tackling root causes, including the dynamics around agricultural food systems in the Sahel, in the Horn of Africa, is going to be key. So for me, the issue of digital, which, as you know, I'm not going to repeat, the billions and initiatives that the European Union has been unveiling. The most recent is the Global Gateway, a year ago, the Digital 4D Hub. So the question is, and this triggered me from what Alexander said, how are we positioning digital vis-a-vis food systems? It is clearly a necessary condition, but certainly not a sufficient condition. And for us, one has to tackle more the structures of food systems before focusing on what could be the transformational aspects of digital. And I give an example. Traditionally, digital, we think about youth, about young people. Why? Because young people want digital applications if they want to be lured into the agriculture, agribusiness sector. Is this automatic? It can be automatic. We see it not only in terms of mobile payments, in terms of e-commerce applications, but clearly the youth need much more than digital applications if the framework conditions are not conducive to invest into agriculture. And this brings me to what we did with the German government a few years ago on G20 Youth Initiative, Youth Employment. And I think it's important to follow and track that initiative, because sometimes we tend to launch initiatives but don't track it. I think it's important within the G7 context, G20 context, to see what are we doing with youth employability, the role of digital, but most importantly, the role of the framework conditions, the structures in place to make agriculture, agribusiness a viable business. Because it's not easy for the 1 million youth or 1.5 million per year who join the market in Africa to actually be attracted to invest, to operate in the agri-food sector. That's one. Secondly, the issue of equity. If we can prove, and to be honest, I can't prove yet because I haven't seen any data unless you know about data, to show that the digital divide in agricultural value chains can be addressed in terms of value chain analysis. Is a digital platform normally, technically, showing more transparency in the price movements across the value chain better or not? The work we are trying to do, and Sebastian knows this, around deforestation-free value chains. And the European Union has unveiled on the 17th of November a proposal for a regulation on transparency of value chains. How can we show digital traceability from the bean to the cup, from the farm to the fork, whether we are speaking about palm oil, about coffee, about cocoa, about livestock, not only in terms of price transmission across the value chain. We speak, and I have heard also in GFFA in the past, lots of work, sterling work that corporates are doing around blockchains, around artificial intelligence. But again, this is like the issue about carbon credits and about carbon sequestrations. How is this being transmitted into the equity dimension of the value chain? Is it the larger, the more equipped farmers, which is good, or is it being squeezing out even more the smaller farmers, the more sort of those who are not necessarily connected? Because yes, internet is there, but there is also proof showing that bandwidth is weak. Bandwidth in rural areas is relatively weak, and the data hubs around digital, it's not well sort of distributed across the African continent. Then typology of production systems. As you know, the European Union is focusing more and more on agroecology or agroecology typology of production systems. And again, there, what type of digital tools can we use, for example, to link better to carbon, to issues around carbon sequestration, to linking agroecology to financial institutions, with the question marks about data, who owns the data, and data access, data protection, and last but not least, the use of geospatial data in terms of tracking humanitarian development dimensions around IPC when we have conflicts the use of cash vouchers, e-vouchers. So all that in terms of tracking hotspots, food crisis hotspots. So there we use technology, we use satellite systems, and the potential is there. So for us, I think 3 take-home messages. 1, we can't do without digital, and we need to unleash the full potential of digital, but in an inclusive way, but embedded in a systemic way of doing food systems approaches. So food systems with biodiversity, with climate, as part of the systems thinking, which we are trying to unleash within the EU Green Deal Farm to Fork biodiversity strategy Fit for 55. One can't communicate without the other, because then it becomes a silo approach, and this will not work. So yes, digital, but within the systems thinking and in the context of smart policies. Digital on its own, if the policies are not smart, will not work. Secondly, that this has to be a priority in the EU-Africa Summit. If one looks at the Kigali Declaration of the end of October, you find somewhere digital, quite big. You find a small paragraph 46, on food systems linked to the CADA process, to the Comprehensive African Agriculture Development Program. There is a risk that if the new administration, the new government administration in Germany, with Paris and with Brussels, if we can create a strong buy-in, which is beyond the issue of vaccines, which is important. I can't say it's very important, because if the African continent is not vaccinated, we will not get out of the woods of this crisis. But food systems has to be at least number 2, 3, or 4 on the agenda, not number 5 or 6 or 7. So this has to be a priority, not only for the Sahel, but for the whole continent. And we need to show, and this is something that we sing the same song from the same hymn sheet with the German government, because Sebastian mentioned G7, it would be good to use this also as a momentum of the G7, G20 process, in this case, G7, where we can trigger also the buy-in of the African continent around regional trade integration, around the African continental free trade area. We need to start proving how digital trade commerce is part of the positive narrative. Many a time, trade and food security is part of the negative narrative. An orientation of food sovereignty, which is fine if you can afford it. But very few of those 54 countries in Africa can afford to be totally food sovereign and operate as islands in a continent. Third issue, we need to show leadership and continue showing leadership in terms of social, environmental standard setting. The Global Gateway is a clear indication of standard setting at the highest level in terms of secure internet access and interoperability, but leadership around social standards, around child labor, around living incomes, around green credentials without greenwashing, and important role of the financial institutions, the EDFIs, the KFWs, the FMOs, the AFDs of this world, to start prioritizing agri-food systems with all the benefits around digital and the digital agenda in terms of de-risking. We still find big resistance of the EDFIs to invest in what we call innovative agriculture. There is easier access to energy or to general SMEs or to digital platforms in general, but not to an innovative agricultural sector, which is still deemed as high risk, difficult to operate in, very fragile. And this, we need to continue homing the message that agriculture is part of the solution, not only for climate change, but also for African development. Over to you.
Thank you, Leonard, and thank you really for reaffirming that food security and digitalization from the perspective of the Commission should be thought together and should really be at the center of attention. Thank you very much for affirming this. I think this is a very good starting point for the discussion that we have now. We now would like to build basically on Leonard's contribution and have a look, how does this food and nutrition security imperative look like from the point of view of both urban and rural areas. And I'm very grateful that we have Elizabeth Kimani-Murage with us, who's the head of the Maternal and Child Well-being section at the Africa Population and Health Research Center, also known by its acronym APHRC. Elizabeth, thank you very much for being with us. The floor is yours. Please expand on the question on what it is that digitalization would need to respond to if it is to be meaningful for food security.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever people are. So I'm going to make a case for why we need to focus on transformative food systems for Africa. And I see digitalization as one of the ways of making our food systems transformative. Just briefly on the background about food as a human right. It's recognized as a universal human right under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It has been recognized in several conventions, and some of which Africa is party to. And many countries in Africa have also constitutionalized the right to food. For example, Kenya has constitutionalized the right to food, freedom from hunger, and the right to adequate food. And under the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, where this the issue food is is considered a human right. I just picked one article which states that state parties to the present covenant, recognizing the fundamental right of everyone to be free from hunger, shall take individually and through international cooperation the measures, including specific programs, that are needed to improve methods of production, conservation, and distribution of food by making full use of technical and scientific knowledge, and by developing or reforming agrarian systems in such a way to achieve the most efficient development and utilization of natural resources. So today we are talking about this. We are talking about how this cooperation can happen through digitalization to really make our food systems efficient. And I have had several of the speakers that have come before me talking about inclusive food systems, and that's how this digitalization will help us. So we have food. The ending hunger is the second sustainable development goal, and the first target is about ensuring access to safe, nutritious, and sufficient food for all. So we are talking about inclusivity, not leaving anyone behind, and eradicating all forms of malnutrition. So for us to be able to do this, we need to think about transformative, innovative ways, and digitalization is one of those innovative ways that we can be able to bring inclusivity in our systems. I know Sebastian talked a bit about the trends in food security in Africa. Just to note that Africa is not on track to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal number 2. We have close to two-thirds of people in Africa are food insecure, close to a quarter of the population being severely food insecure. And Africa is the continent where we have highest levels of this food insecurity. And this chart shows the trends since 2000 to 2019, and we can see at around here at 2019, we have high numbers of people being hungry. 250 million considered to be hungry, and which represents about a fifth of the population. And there is extreme poverty, with 430 million Africans being living in extreme poverty, and many more are underemployed. And Africa is where you find highest food costs. And about 3/4 of Africans cannot afford healthy diets. A third of children in sub-Saharan Africa are actually stunted, and about 40% of all stunted children are found in Africa. So really, there is a concern about food insecurity in Africa, about hunger, about malnutrition, and we really need to urgently address this. We are in the last decade of towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and unless we really address this problem, we cannot. Unless we have transformative approaches, we may not be able to address the problem. So coming closer to where I live and where my work is concentrated, I work in Kenya. I am based in Kenya. Of course, we do research across Africa. A lot of my work has been based in urban poor settings. And in Kenya, in work we've done in Nairobi, about 80% of households are actually food insecure. And close to half of children under 5 years are stunted. So this is really a dire problem that we have in urban areas. And sub-Saharan Africa, we have this kind of situation where majority of urban residents are now living in urban poor settings. So really, it's a major problem, and unless we address we have inclusive approaches, then we cannot be able to address the issue of food security. And when we have talked to these people, one of the things they say is that there is food in the house, in the market, but there is no food in the house. And this is talking about access. They don't have. There could be food around in the market, food being produced, but they are not able to access it. And a lot of this food that's already produced goes to waste because there is a problem with the access to that food. So a lot of food expires in the market and goes to the dump sites, and increasing the gases in the landfills, and so actually destroying our environment. So this just shows one of the coping strategies is that these urban poor people, some of them have to go scavenge in the dump sites to just collect that food that has been dumped, a lot of food that is being dumped in these dump sites, to collect it and eat it. So really, we need a system that can really link the food to the people where it's needed the most. We have a system that links this, and this can be a digital system. So where I see, to address our problems, I see the place of digitalization in food linkages to really link food supply. So where the food is being produced and where the people who need it are, so that it can be efficient and there is less food wastage and there is more equity, there is more inclusivity in our food system. It can also be used for food sharing. So the food supply that is in the demand and supply kind of situation where in the market, but also food sharing. Africa, we celebrate having this spirit of Ubuntu. I am because we like to share. And we can have systems where people are enabled to do that instead of wasting food. Because as I said, a lot of food is being wasted and it's going to the landfills and really also destroying our environment. Instead of that food going, can we have zero waste and we have that food recirculated in the system? So talking about food rescue system, we can have a digital tool that helps that kind of system to be connected. So there could be many ways of having digital tools or digitalization helping in the food system, but these are some of the suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for sharing your perspective and for already linking your insights to where digital tools could come in. I'd like to recognize there are 2 questions in the chat or the question answer session. We'll turn to them in our facilitated discussion. Before that, I would like to give the floor to Bernd Erasmus. Bernd Erasmus is the Dean of the Faculty of Agriculture, Natural and Agricultural Sciences at the University of Pretoria. Bernd, I suppose you take us from the urban to the rural areas. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yes, and I think actually by design there's actually quite a really nice introduction by the previous speakers on where I'm going with this. So I'm not quite sure about who our audience is. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on food systems perspective, and bear with me if there's some repetition of what you already know or from other areas of expertise. But towards the end, I'll dig into some of the elements of the African food systems that we think are different and what implications are for digitization. And then we'll end off with a few suggestions and considerations for individual farmers, but also at the policy level when we think about digitization. So we know that industrial scale food production is one of the largest drivers of land transformation and land degradation globally. So I think it's common knowledge that way of feeding the globe is one that's unsustainable and does need to change. Of course, this now has consequences when we think about development in Africa. Do we just transform the Miombo belt into large-scale industrial soybean farms, or do we come up with some alternative? And I do think we've sort of agreed that we do need an alternative which is more sustainable, more biodiversity friendly, and has more equal, just, and longer-term sustainable outcomes. The reason why I bring justice into it is that the consequences of this industrial scale transformation and degradation is not evenly distributed among the value chain. So we know that the ratio of local costs and benefits vary widely. It depends on the crop, it depends on tenure, the mode of production. But on balance, the evidence suggests that the global benefits for local costs tends to be the norm for industrial scale farming. So that's a given. We know of industrial scale farming, the impacts are wide and varied. I mean, I can't get into all the details here, but we know about greenhouse gas emissions from unsustainable livestock practices, from tilling practices, also additional greenhouse gas emissions, loss of carbon from the soil as a result. We know about eutrophication of water sources. We know about the loss of pollination as a nature-based service for other agricultural activities. And yeah, I mean, all these impacts vary in time and space and who it affects. We also know that Africa has tremendous agricultural potential to feed not only its only growing population, but also as a development vehicle for African countries to participate on equal footing on the global stage. And I think that's also a given. It's been quite clear from the previous talk, this is the direction we want to go. Whether this potential will be realized or not depends entirely on the development pathway. Now, the development pathway is partly a choice, but it's also a choice done by external market factors as well as internal deliberate choices at country level or continent level. So if we just go with more industrial food production, we'll probably end up feeding the rest of the world, but we'll entrench and deepen the current inequalities and the associated continental food insecurity. We also have catastrophic consequences for meeting global emission targets. So this is definitely off the table. But what are the alternatives? Well, the food systems paradigm has been with us for quite some time, and it's been mentioned by many of the other speakers. But if we don't understand the interlinkages and we don't understand the interdependencies of the different elements of the value chain for formal and informal food systems across the continent, then it would be very difficult to implement this food systems framework as a way to think about digitization. This is not simple to unpack the food system in its different constituents for any large food system, but the context specific and the nuanced details of food systems in particular locations does provide very real and very direct guidance on what digitization might achieve, good or bad. Obviously, we want to go towards the good side, but understanding that interdependency is the first part of this element. If we start digging into elements of the African food system, which makes it different and would provide unique challenges, but also opportunities for digitization, I think the one part is that a large part of the African food system is informal. So when we think about informality, this is not necessarily subsistence farming, right? So we do have subsistence farmers, transitioning farmers, pre-commercial, or even commercial farmers, where a large portion of their produce end up in an informal market, either by virtue of local markets or by virtue of involving the local community and labor. And there's a number of different avenues to do that. So when you think about an informal component of the food system, it's not necessarily just subsistence farming. And I think that's quite an important part going forward. I think that the key would be for a digitalization approach is recognizing this diversity of farmers. When I say the diversity of farmers, is that we need to recognize that in the same way that farmers at different levels of complexity need different types of development support to be effective, sustainable, and food secure. In the same way, we would need to tailor-make the digitization options and solutions to these different types of farming. So if we look at a subsistence farmer from a development point of view, the types of assistance to get them to be more food secure might be focused around social protection, around safety nets and transfers, low-cost technologies, perhaps some subsidized inputs, securing land rights, empowering women, support for non-farm diversification. Those might be options for a subsistence farmer. If you then move to a transitioning farmer, so this is someone that already sells some of his produce, but not on large and open markets, but mostly to neighbors. Perhaps the need here would be a transition and support for non-farm activity, including development of small business, need some, again, empowering women with encouragement for entrepreneurship, safety nets, securing land rights, in different order of priority than we had for the subsistence farmer. In the same way, each of these development possibilities and development support activities would need an accompanying digitization option that is also sensitive to the stage and the needs of the individual farmer. We can now go through all the different stages in farming, pre-commercial and commercial, but the point I like to make here, without getting into too much detail, is that a digitization solution needs to recognize the diversity of farming practices on the continent in the same way that well-planned development aid does. So these two go together. So I'm not saying we have to have development aid before we can digitization. That's a different relationship. I'm just using it as an analogy and saying the same way that we need to tailor-make development aid for farmers at different levels of complexity, we need to tailor-make the digitization intervention for the different levels of complexity of the farmers. Wrapping up, that's at the level of the individual farmer, but at the policy level, I think there's also opportunity for farmers, for digitization to have the required impact. So previously, policies that focused increasingly on agricultural supply in the context of population growth is now working towards a transformation of the entire food system. So whatever digitalization intervention we have, need to recognize that shift in emphasis and policy. Same way, thinking of food security and nutrition as a sectoral issue, we know that this is a systemic issue. Third sort of policy emphasis shift, previously an exclusive focus on reducing hunger and undernutrition. Well, we know that hunger and malnutrition in all its forms are complexly related to each other. And the digitization response should also recognize that. And finally, on the final policy emphasis shift, previously were on finding globally applicable food security and nutrition solutions. We need to understand that the problem is context specific, that require diverse solutions. And this speaks to my previous point about farmers at the different stages and different levels of formal and informal markets that they've got access to. So last statement, I think digitalization provides an opportunity for the informal parts of the African food system to avoid being marginalized. But without a systems approach and without a clear understanding of the needs of farmers, using the analogy of development aid for different stages of farming, we run the risk of even with the best intentions, still having a perverse outcome of eroding agency and sustainability of the African food system. So that's the danger, but at the same time, the opportunity. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Byron, really, and in particular for emphasizing the role of the informal within the food system, and that the system approach is needed to address. And I think this also speaks to what Elizabeth has outlined before when it comes to the urban areas. For example, enhancing access in urban areas, which is predominantly channeled through informal channels. And I think, Byron, what you've just did actually responds to a question that one of our viewers had, where she or he asked sort of where is the substantial production that can be used or where digitalization can be used to use it further. I think with your typology of farmers or farming systems that you have proposed, this speaks to this question and actually emphasizing the complexity of actors in the system. Our next the next question in the chat emphasizes to what extent we are, or what is our understanding of digitalization. And I'm very grateful that we have two very well-versed speakers with us who could respond to the question of what does doing digital development or doing development digitally, what this means and what are the dimensions of this. And first I would like to turn to Mawaki Chango, who's the founder and CEO of DigiLexis Consulting. He's based in Togo. Mawaki, thank you very much for being with us. The floor is yours. And if you could allude to the different dimensions that this digitalization implies, I would be very grateful. Thank you. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you, everyone. And especially the previous speakers, they have given us a lot of food for thought. So while I was listening to Alexander at the opening about the needs of not just focusing on the technology, but the processes actually, it reminded me of another cautionary tale about technology and development, which was like quarter a century ago. The predominant discourse was that the internet will enable Africa to leapfrog its development stages of development evolution trajectory. The thing is, well, at that time I was wondering, I was perplexed. How would that happen? And that was the question that led me to start a career in ICT for development. And quickly I realized that there was a glitch, because first internet as innovation happened within an ecosystem with a particular mindset. So for people to think that, other people far away from that mindset, whose mindset is far away from that mindset will be able to leverage that innovation to leapfrog completely their development process based on the industrialization model. It was quite a wishful thinking, and there's a need. Quickly we realized that there was a need to work on processes, to work on how people appropriate the technology and how they come to understand the potential of the technology for themselves, for their situation, for their problems. So there's enough mindset changing to go around. And in this context of this European EU partnership, we realize that there's some of that top-down approach still in process here. Because actually, if we have to talk about right-based approach, then we need to include the right holders, not just as receivers, but as active participants in the process, even in the process of developing the partnership framework, let alone the process, the policy-making process. So I'm advocating for a multi-level approach, a multi-level partnership. It can be just a partnership between governments. You can't just let governments define or negotiate the terms of the partnership. We need to include the rights holders, the farmers, the citizens, etc., in the process of defining the partnership. So when we talk about digital technology, digital innovation, there are a lot of initiatives out there. You have the Golden Global Open Data for Agriculture and Nutrition. That's a network of organizations, people, government, private sectors, using public open data, publicly available data to enhance or to to help farmers to increase their productivity. You have an agricultural intelligence observatory supported by the World Bank using publicly available data as well to monitor climate change parameters for agriculture. So, and you have, on the other hand, you have very, small mobile apps addressing these or that markets. But the thing is, oftentimes you don't have an integrated back end to all those initiatives, and it just feels scattered. And also regarding the larger ones, you don't have people making sure that the benefits or the value of those initiatives actually impact people on the ground. I can tell if in Togo right now there's someone I can go to if I want to use the benefit from the value of the observatory, for example, and let alone the farmers in the hinterland. They don't know of all those things. We used to have extension workers, but nobody really talked about that anymore. So how do we make sure, using digital technology, that people who need those information and data can use them and can use them, really to the full extent of their potential for maximum benefits? One thing we can think of first is community networks. Maybe community networks are not all that fashionable anymore in the US or in Europe, but they do have a lot of an important role to play in Africa, in the African context. First, they are built on actual physical community, on localities. And they involve the community members. They are built actually by community members with help from wherever they can get help, but the network is built by community members. So it's something that, the networks involve grassroots communities. The increased participation of the marginal people, the have-nots, or the usual left behind that we are talking about here. So their participation is increased in discussion and decision-making for solving collective problems. They improve also those networks. They improve access to relevant information for community members, facilitate delivery of government services and political participation, meaning being aware and participating in government processes and decision-making. So that's an important link to think of when we are talking about digital innovation and ways to make sure that the grassroots community are involved in identifying the problems, in defining the parameters for solution, and implementing the outcome of those innovations. The second point I want to make about policy or defining a partnership framework is that not only it needs to be multi-level, it also needs to be open and multi-stakeholder. We all know that in Africa, we don't, the involvement of civil society or citizen in policymaking is quite marginal in many countries at least. And there's the mindset of the winner takes it all. Once formal democratic elections happen, and in the governance process, public governance process, or political governance process, the citizens are not that involved. So when we are defining these international cooperation instruments, international partnerships, that's the place where we can hear more from the citizen. We can make sure the citizen participates upfront into defining the terms of the partnership and how this is supposed to work. So we are used to talking about multilateral cooperation for development. Then at some point, we moved to include public-private partnership. Maybe that was sometime in the 90s as well. And what I am advocating for here is that it's time for us to move to government civil society partnership as well. And based on what I just said in terms of the relationship between African government and their civil society, I will urge the European governments, when defining these kind of instruments, to open the process up to African civil society, to make sure that they submit comments. African civil society, including academics and experts. We do have some of those experts. And when talking about high level or emerging technology like blockchain, artificial intelligence and all that, we need to link with those people, even if they still need some capacity building to do. We need to involve them from the start so that yes.
Sorry, may I ask you to wrap up? I think this is a very important point that you made here, but may I ask you to wrap up and conclude? I apologize really for interrupting your train of thought.
Okay, I have a very slow pace of talking, noting that English is not my first language. So yes, I'll wrap up. So there's a need to include the non-state actors. And lastly, I'll say we need to make sure that once we set up those frameworks and implement programs within those frameworks, there's some management to follow up on to make sure that all the segments of all the stakeholders get involved, stay involved, and actually to monitor the impact of those programs on the ground. And we still need civil society and local experts, even local strategic thinking, to make sure we are following these rights and to make sure the benefits that were expected are the one we are getting out of those programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mawaki. And Leonard, this is a heads up for you. I will give you the floor after our next speaker has spoken, because the question that Mawaki has raised on the link between civil society and governments and how digitalization can be used actually not only as a tool to improve economic development, but also to enhance social accountability is, from my point of view, a perspective that is often not featuring that prominently. So Leonard, please brace yourself. But before I give you the floor, I'll ask our last speaker, Tunde, who is an advisor to the Economic Commission for Africa and a managing partner of KidsCo, to please share his perspective. Then it's Leonard, and then we move to the discussion. And I would ask you to please have a look at the Q&A section. Benjamin Adam is sort of posing interesting questions there that I will get back to in the chat. So it's Tunde, Leonard, and then we'll move to the Q&A. Thank you. Tunde, the floor.
Thank you very much. Yes, and to the organizers, a pleasure to be here. This is a critical topic, as we've heard from some of the previous, or really all of the previous speakers. Why? We know that there are more than 250 million smallholder farmers on the African continent. 70% of the population is under 24 years of age. There's 170 million young people that will come into the employment market over the next 10 years. The informal economy is 70% of the overall economy on the African continent. At the same time, while mobile penetration is relatively high, it's actually only about 50% when you look at unique subscribers and take out multiple SIMs. Internet, as we've heard, is less than 30%. So against this backdrop, we have a number of interlocking or systemic challenges that many of the previous panelists have mentioned. We're lacking platforms for collaboration, as my colleague Mawaki has emphasized. We have employment challenges. We've heard about food security issues because of the poverty levels in many cases, including the rural farmers, with more than 50% of the population. Sometimes higher numbers are given for those who are involved in agriculture. We have challenges on collecting and delivering information and digital solutions. And in some cases, there's significant actually difficulty in accessing capital and finance for small farmers. So I would just briefly like to suggest that while there are challenges on one side and technologies and tools and the importance of digitalization on the other, what we're lacking is a central framework to bring these two factors together. The problems on the one hand and the digital tools and services and policies on the other. And that one way to do that, building on Mawaki's intervention here, is one to ensure that what we're doing is people-centric, that the smallholder farmers, say in this case, as part of the overall food system, are being involved and listened to, have agency. And we've heard from colleagues about the importance of rights and food as a right. Also would suggest that there's an opportunity to build collaborative digital platforms. Now, I use the term collaborative digital platforms differently than normal platforms that tend to be the winner-take-all type of platforms, but rather to have platforms where those who are participating and using and contributing to the platform, which would include smallholder farmers, have a share and ownership in the platform. And so these more collaborative platforms could be a key integration point for bringing together policies, applications, delivery of services to smallholder farmers on a community level. Which brings me to the third element of what I would suggest is a proposal here, which is to have what we'd call digital agriculture community workers. So the reality is that the internet and digital technologies are not reaching everybody. They're not inclusive for a lot of reasons, including infrastructure, including broadband, including policies, including skills. Over time, that will be solved, but that will be 10 or 15 years that we can't wait for. So we need to get these tools and systems into the hands of people that need them. And we can do that on a community basis by having community digital workers that can provide shared platforms. There's no reason why smartphones and tablets can't be used in the same way that Uber and Grab reuse personal vehicles, so that we have a shared way to get technology into the hands of the people that need them, the services and deliveries on a collaborative platform that includes civil society, and a way for young people to use and benefit from technology and gain employment and deliver livelihood. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tunde. This was very concise and to the point, and I very much like the idea of community digital workers. Is a concept that I think most of us can probably very well relate to. Benjamin, a heads up to you if you want to pose your question as a panelist. Bruno will give you the floor, but before Leonard, I asked you to please be so kind to respond to Mawaki's point. So Leonard, the floor is yours. I'm afraid, Leonard, you're still muted.
Yes. We have a model in the European Union, which is called the LEADER model, which is embedded in the rural development component. And this was some work that NEPAD did 10 years ago. I don't know whether Alexander and Sebastian remember. This was known as Rural Futures, but it sort of phased out into nothing. Because the issue of governance, decentralization, community participation, role of local actors is key in all this. That's why I said earlier on, digital is the tool, but the framework conditions need to be there. You can't have digital if the food chain or the value chain remains embedded in inequalities because of asymmetric information systems, power within the value chains between big and small, formal and informal. And what was also mentioned by the professor from Pretoria, having a multitude of models, which is sort of fine-tuned or calibrated to specific situations, is the ideal. But we know that digital is a drive which pushes quality or pushes the strongest in the value chain. So first thing, I think that with the G7, with the EU-Africa Summit, we need also to start prioritizing the territorial and the multi-stakeholder approach. We started with the cocoa value chain, Sebastian knows. And this is hard work, because if you want multi-stakeholder, you want to be representative, you want to involve everyone, you want to involve the weakest parts of the value chain, and you want to be transparent. But if you want to do this across the whole food system, across 20, 30 value chains, in a systems approach, this is hard work, which, to be honest, very few governments want to engage in, because it's hard work. Also, at a continental level, it becomes very complicated. So what we want to start signaling out is that the preconditions of digital requires multi-stakeholder approaches, and what we are trying to construe in the cocoa value chain could be a pathway forward. Why? Because we tackle the social angle, we tackle the governance angle, we tackle the living income angle, and the environmental angle. This has to be scaled up at food systems approach at country level, eventually at continental level, but let's start at least with having this decentralized approach with some of the like-minded countries. And we are prepared to engage with you using our tools. And clearly, this commission is also giving a clear signal to CSOs, to civil society organizations, to be more on the driving seat with more power. And this we can do it also in our dialogues and in our budget support with our governments, including clearly on gender empowerment. This is going to be more and more a key priority for this commission. Over to you, yes.
Thank you very much, Leonard. We have Sebastian has emphasized, as you just now did, Leonard, the question of inequities that influence whether or not digitalization will actually work for SDG 2. I think both Mawaki and Tufunde had proposals on how to actually address these inequities. So Benjamin, you have raising questions on an ecosystem approach to digitalization. Would you feel like posing your question now so that everybody can hear it?
Thank you. Yes. Good to see a lot of familiar faces here. No, what I was trying to say is there's a lot of work going on. There are a lot of players, in this area, not only in Africa, but across the low and middle income countries. So what we are doing at the Commonwealth Secretariat is to try to see how we can coordinate, how we can not to also start something new, not to also start implementing new solutions for agriculture, but try to see how do we coordinate the system. So that's the ecosystem approach that we're talking of. So one of the activities that we are thinking of is assessing tool for assessing the impact of digitalization on smallholder agriculture. And we are looking forward to working with partners to actually develop such kind of index that everybody can assess. As of now, everybody has its own tool for assessing, their project, and it's not working. It's difficult to get impact figures for investors to invest in, digital ag, or even development organizations to say, we are having progress, so we should continue. So that's what I was referring to.
Thank you, Benjamin. Mawaki, you have now 2 points to actually build on, both Leonard's response as well as Benjamin's contribution. You emphasized the whole question of platforms and community technology. How does this sound that you've heard of now? Sort of, are you the questions that you, the answers that you received by Leonard, how do they resonate with you?
Yes. Am I unmuted now? Okay, thank you, Jess. Yes, I was glad to hear those contributions. Actually, I also noted Leonard's his remarks talking about smart policy, and I realized that that's really a good approach. That's a starting point. Maybe governments are reluctant doing some of that, or just because it's difficult. But I'm sure if we think about it hard enough, we'll find ways to implement multi-stakeholder, not in a direct way like we talk about direct democracy, but we'll find levels of representations that will make it easier to integrate in the final outcome of policies and partnership frameworks. It was also very, very good surprise to see Ben. Since we worked with Ben, we went to Syracuse University together. We worked on community informatics, a report for NEPAD, and that issue of community networks, of course, was part of it. And I'm happy that he's still working on that kind of issues, and I believe we have good people around to try to solve the problem. So I'm hopeful. Let's put it that way.
Thank you, Mawaki. Tunde, you have probably the best access from all of us to the ECA. Would you have any question to the other panelists, sort of, if you are to further advise the ECA? What are the questions that you are likely to be posed, and what is it that you would like to ask the panelists, so that you sort of can assume a relay function between what we're discussing here and what are the information, the questions or the information needs by ECA ahead of these upcoming negotiations?
Thanks for that question. Well, I think the first question would be to ask, we know that the EU is actually the biggest investor on the continent of Africa, ahead of even China or the US. So I think one question is, what percentage of the funding and investment flow is coming into these kind of areas and solutions for agriculture? Secondly, I would suggest that we discuss what is needed to get these kind of collaborative solutions funded and up and running. We've heard about the importance of a civil society, of having adequate and proper data governance here that respects rights. And those would be two initial areas that I'd probably highlight: the financing and the support of collaborative and data approaches that put people at the center, give agency, and support data rights.
Thank you, Tunde. Before I give the floor to Leonard, and apologies for putting you on the hot seat again, Tunde, if you have any brief piece where you describe what you mean with these collaborative platforms that you could post in the chat, this would be helpful for us then in the follow-up also after the event. Leonard, do you feel like responding to Tunde already, or shall I give the floor to another speaker first?
You can maybe give the chance to other speakers, and then maybe I can also give some recommendations of how we can work together with in the run up to the summit on this topic, because I think it's critical. You can't have empowerment or governance, and digital will not just come automatic. You need to have the structures in place. So maybe I can chip in later on or in the wrap up.
Thank you, Leonard. Elizabeth, then I would like to turn to you. I sort of, before I joined this meeting, we had a discussion on the informal sector, principally highlighting the work in Nairobi and how sort of what are the tools that might be helpful in the collaboration with the informal sector. And I think the point on community networks and how community networks might help in creating further social capital. So I would like to ask you, Elizabeth, hearing to the other panelists, how does this resonate with you from arguing or looking at the food security question from an urban point of view and from informal settlement point of view?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, that actually relates to the suggestion I was making about having these digital tools help to connect people with the food. So as I mentioned, a lot of food goes to waste while so many people are hungry. So instead of having food being wasted and people have to go collect it from dump sites, we can have a system that really connects the food where the food may be in excess to where the food is available. And so these community connections can be created through digital tools. And one of the ways, like I work with a team, I work with a partner called Fruity Schools Africa, and they are planting fruit trees in schools, even in urban poor settings, in urban areas, and also. So one of the suggestions he made in one of the meetings is that he's actually trying to see how to connect schools in rural areas and schools in urban areas, because schools in rural areas have a lot of space and they can do a lot of fruit trees in their compounds, and they could have excess, and they can be connected with schools in urban poor settings or in urban areas, and that system can help circulate those kind of the fruits to the urban areas. And there could be something else that the urban areas could be able to produce that can be shared with the schools in the rural areas. So really those kind of connections can be enabled through these digital tools. So I'm talking about food sharing because I know we are talking about, of course, resilient food systems and human-centered food systems, and looking at food from a human rights perspective, that nobody should sleep hungry, nobody should be hungry, everyone should be fed. We need to look at all these ways of creating inclusivity in the food system and helping really ensure that there is efficiency and there is no food going to waste and there is equity in the food system. So I see these digital tools as being useful in actually connecting the food, creating those linkages between people, between where food is being produced and where it needs to be consumed, and really to ensure efficiency.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Barend, question to you. What sort of during COVID, what we had observed in our work on digitalization is that people start to use very accessible social media apps to basically do quality control in their purchasing or marketing of produce to actually reduce the transaction costs that had become incredibly high because of lockdown situations. From your experience, are there other sort of very accessible tools for smallholders that are actually currently being used for marketing purposes? That sort of speaking to the question of accessibility of these tools.
Thanks, yes. I think there's a number of payment systems that have developed quite informally. I mean, there's a number of countries, I think in South Africa, it's called the M-Pesa system. I think there's an equivalent in East Africa, which is a token-based system with real currency behind it, which is widely used. There's also wide use of using mobile earphone or mobile phone airtime as an alternative mechanism of interacting and payment and currency. So what I see is that we shouldn't look at the opportunities that we see as a blank canvas. I think the entrepreneurship and the innovation and the needs and the access to mobile technology on smartphones have already created a significant need and an appetite for it. So I think it's about leveraging that additional appetite and then also looking back carefully about what gave rise to the current system. Right? So what was available that people are now using, let's say mobile phone airtime as a currency, and what was not there that they resorted to doing that. I mean, those are the enabling and the factors and the barriers and the hurdles to understand when we think about new ways of enabling these payment systems.
Thank you, Baron. No, sorry. Leonard, now to wrap up and respond, the floor is yours.
Thanks, yes. Look, I would say this was extremely useful and we need to start addressing the gaps. It would be good. I don't know whether your team with Alexander, with Sebastian, trying to do a bit of minimal mapping of what the gaps are in terms of typology of needs. Because I can bombard everyone with calls about CSOs and we have lots of tools and billions on the gateway. It will not solve your problems because they are quite specific to the needs of local communities. So I would like that I put you in touch with targeted people in the delegations and see what can be done. First of all, that's a key role, is our role in policy dialogue with your respective governments, because this structural change has to come at the highest level. If you don't have smart policies, you can't connect all the issues that we have been discussing. Elizabeth mentioned food loss and waste. For those who have been close to the UN Food System Summit, the labyrinth of issues, challenges is quite significant. So if I need to construe a bit of connectivity between food loss and waste, healthy diets, access in terms of logistics, infrastructure, cold storage, connectivity, equity, gender transformation, access to youths. This is not just going to be at the touch of a button that digital will solve all these problems. You need to have smart policies, you need to have robust policies, and you need to have accountability, which very few countries have the buy-in of all this together. I just need to recall that out of the CADEP process, very few still, after so many decades, are complying with the CADEP principles, the Comprehensive African Development Program. So we need to hold accountable at the highest level, but then try to give you the instruments, the tools, and the de-risking investments where we can bridge the gaps that you have been mentioning, including digital connectivity. The big challenge out there is that with the Rome-based agencies, with World Bank, but here we speak mainly about the Rome-based agencies because there is where our leverage is. We see what can the digital agenda do better at country level. And that means also that we put each other in touch with our delegations and the FAO representative office to really be more accessible in terms of your needs and demands. I'm not saying that there will be a solution to all your demands, but at least we know what the gaps are at very local level, at very specific level. because this is not just a problem of funding. It's not primarily a funding issue. This is an issue of connecting the dots in a smart way, and also setting the scene for a more structured dialogue in a multi-stakeholder approach at the decentralized level with local action groups. And if there is buy-in of governments to do this, we are there also to facilitate these, as we are doing, for example, on cocoa. Over to you.
Thank you, Leonard, for this encouraging outlook. We are really coming to close with this webinar. And I think what leaves me extremely encouraged is that through your contributions, we really could show that there is a rich universe, not only of existing digital innovations, but also of ideas on how to develop this further. And obviously this discussion is not conclusive here, and it need not be. IEEP, the Institute for European Environmental Policy, and TMG will continue to work on this agenda. The next event will address the question that Leonard had raised on question of gender access, of the digital divide and gender. So I'm in the fortunate position to not actually offer conclusions. We will follow up with the dear panelists on what Leonard has said on the question, to what extent can we maybe follow up on these more local dialogues. So I'm in a very fortunate position to thank you all for your rich contributions. Distinguished panelists, thank you very much on behalf of IEEP and TMG. I know that this is a busy time, so thank you very much really for affording us with your precious time. I would like to thank the participants who shared their questions and listened in. And I wish you all a very nice day. See you next time. We will be in touch. Thank you very much to all, and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Cheers.